Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
One of the things we're trying to accomplish here is that everyone in the audience has to deal with, most of them, global companies. And one of the things that clearly we're seeing with the change in Washington, with the new administration, with everything we're hearing about trade and tax and repatriation of dollars, what, as CEO of Oracle, are you seeing how these trade areas and things with NAFTA and TPP and, are going to affect not only Oracle, but our customers as well?
Well, that's a really complicated subject, so that's not an easy question.
But we have 30 minutes, and I don't have another question.
Okay, I'm in good shape. It's hard to generalize about this because when I think of, as an example, when you mentioned NAFTA, NAFTA is in itself, I don't know if you know the history of NAFTA. The history of NAFTA started, back in the 80s, even before that, when Carter was still in office, pre-Reagan. The fear of the U.S. administration was always that there's a chance that Mexico could turn communist. Mexico had a very leaky border. We worry about their border to us, but their border to the south was extremely leaky. And there were people coming up from the south, very concerned about who that could be, the potential of arms flowing. That related to all these military options like Iran-Contra and all of that didn't work. And so the solution to the potential problem was viewed by Reagan as, let's just fund Mexico, basically give them an advantaged trade deal that would, I can't remember the estimates at the time, but it was like get them $20 to $25 billion. It was almost like give them a check. I'll get U.S. companies to headquarter to put facilities in Mexico. This would create jobs, it would create GDP growth, therefore stabilize Mexico. They would then invest in securing their borders to the north and to the south. And, I think when you look back on it, it probably worked to a degree. I think this is off the top of my head, so somebody could search this, I could be wrong. But the deficit, I think, with Mexico is now something like $75 billion. Not 25 billion. And so forgetting the personalities of politics and all that, when you hear people say that NAFTA doesn't really work, it's hard to argue with that because what's happened has been a core group of people have taken those benefits and they seem to be centralized in a very small area in Mexico, in the central part of Mexico, around Mexico City. And so, I think that's in itself, if you separate that from TPP in Asia, that's a very challenging problem that has to get resolved because you've basically paid that country with a beneficial trade deal to create jobs in the hope that they would then do a certain set of tasks. And then I think you could argue they just haven't done them, which is basically secure their northern border. TPP is much more complicated, is a deal. I would say one thing without getting into TPP, which is, again, is a sort of a NAFTA-like agreement. China has, I'm sure you all were thinking about this morning, but if you look at the leverage, China's got about a $10 or $11 trillion economy, and it grows about 6%. So if you just thought about this as a business problem, they have a $660 billion worth of growth per year, 6% on the 11 trillion. It's not quite 11 trillion. Their trade surplus with us is about $500 billion. So if you just start doing the math, and there's a little goofiness because of the way they handle their currency, so you can't ever really be sure, what's what. But if you just use those numbers straight up, almost all their growth comes from the United States surplus. So again, when you look at it from just a pure economy perspective, you can get why somebody would say, hey, we need to make sure your currency is fair and trade is fair for everybody. Now, for us, it's different, because you asked the question through our eyes. Our eyes being Oracle, I understand why the U.S. has certain things. We're different in that we're a global company headquartered in the U.S. So we want free trade. We don't want any tariffs on anybody's part in any country, whether we're exporting or whether we're importing. So I think we'll have to let this shake out. Our strategy is to be in a position where we compete and we'll cut an invoice in 100 countries. There's 200 and some countries in the world. We'd like to expand the number of countries we reach out to, not shrink them. So I think as a company, we're after free trade. We want to hire more people. We have an issue with trying to make sure we can get the best talent into Oracle. That's a whole other issue, which you didn't bring up, which is, how it relates to our ability to, immigration and so forth, which is another complex problem, as complex as trade. So there's a lot of complexities right now. And, our strategy is to obviously get the best people, build the best technology, and get it into as many customers' hands as possible around the planet. We want as few limiters on that as absolutely possible. Did that answer your question, or was that too long?
Oh, no, I think it was fine.
Okay, thank you.
I think it was great. Do you think that there's differentiation between industry to industry and, particularly our industry, which is IT? How does that play in the global challenges?
Well, IT is a small industry, right? IT is only, depending what you put in, what segments of IT you put in, IT is only 3% of global GDP. So it's a small, industry on a relative basis. Manufacturing, banking, some of these industries are gargantuan relative to the global economy. Some of these can be, quadruple what our industry is. So the key thing with our industry is we're an enabler to most of that GDP as opposed to a big part of that GDP. And so I think the way I would think about IT as a part of the global economy is it creates, in many ways, a level playing field for many, not just across industry, but in many cases, intra-industry. So the fact that you can see what technology has done as an enabler just in industries like retail or industries like banking, the fact that you can now get services from virtually anybody, anywhere, anytime, and the only differentiation you now have is your brand and your level of service. It's really hard because the technology has disintermediated, what were typically advantages of scale, like brick and mortar, like number of branches, et cetera, et cetera. Many of those advantages have been pulled away as a result of technology. So I think technology breaks down so many barriers, both globally, cross-industry, and very frankly, intra-industry.
So last week, we reported earnings and reported tremendous cloud growth. You were interviewed on CNBC, where you talked about that cloud growth. Cloud means a lot of different things to a lot of people, but what is Oracle's position, and what's your view on why companies should move to the cloud as fast as possible?
Well, if I take Oracle out of it for a second, I think that the movement to cloud is, our industry has historically been us providing piece parts to companies, you as customers taking those piece parts, assembling them yourself, and trying to get them to work into some sort of solution. That's the history of our industry, a component-based base. And the really nice thing is customers have historically bought the way the companies have built. There's somebody in the customer who actually buys storage. It's crazy. Somebody in the customer says, I buy servers and I buy database. Everybody buys in piece parts. So the whole supply chain is sort of lined up to execute that. And so I think that the cloud thing is against a bigger backdrop, Bob. I think it isn't just about technology. I think it's about the business model. I think the problem you have now is that CEOs, I'm very empathetic to all the CEOs, and CEOs last a little more than 4 years on average. So if you get these jobs, you got to, if you get a chance to meet with a CEO, you got to meet with them fast because they're not around very long, right? They go relatively quick. Yeah, you got to, it's time. Yeah, thank you, Bob. So then you got 40% of CEOs don't actually make it 18 months. And so the reason for all of that churn, that velocity, is because of this, sort of unforgiving public markets. And you have to deliver fast. And, in spite of whatever you hear, this nobility around, I'm going to transform this stuff and that stuff. In many cases, you don't have time to transform anything. You have to deliver cash flow. You have to deliver earnings. You got to do it fast. And if you don't, the next person is brought in to go do it. And you've got this higher level of corporate activism and all of this. So I think that cloud is as important because of business model as it is to do with the technology. I think the fact that I can move capital off my balance sheet onto somebody else's is a big deal. I think the fact that I can move work out of my shop to somebody else's shop is a big deal. I think the fact I can get somebody to do innovation for me, that's on the same dollar at a lower price is a big deal. I think the fact that somebody can give me better security for my IT and do it on their dollar, that's a big deal. I think all of these things have at least as much to do with a CEO and CFO and a business model perspective as it does with technology. And I think that's why it's got the sort of velocity. I think if it was just another interesting technology, you'd get one result. I think the fact that it costs less, it drives more innovation. Because I actually think if you went into a CEO and said, you can get exactly what you have today, nothing changes. I'm just going to get it done for 20% less. Almost every CEO would say, great, do it. I think if you say, I'm actually going to get more stuff and I'm going to do it for 20% less, then they want you to even do it faster. And the fact that it's a secure environment. So I think that's what's driven the momentum behind it. And I don't think it'll slow down. I think you're going to see data centers go away. I think you're going to see servers go. I think there's as much stuff as I can get into this new business model. I'm going to push in there for bigger reasons than just technology. I think it's as much to do with how I want to get my company to perform. I mean, you got to remember, if you're a CEO, worldwide GDP growth is 2%. That's it. So if you take 75 trillion times 2%, you get 1.5 trillion. That's all the growth in the world to go get. And then, by the way, 40% of all that growth, remember, is in one country. It's in China. So you're competing. If you're not in China, you're competing for the other 60%, which means by definition you're competing for $700 or $800 billion. It sounds like a lot, but it's got to be spread across every company on the planet Earth. So the only way I know to grow in a non-growth GDP environment is to take somebody else's customers. So I have to take somebody else's customers and make them my customer. You're trying to do the same thing to me. So what does a CEO do? He tries to invest in programs, projects that allow me to give better service, give better products in order so I can steal somebody else's customers. Simultaneously, they're trying to cut costs. And I think there's hardly a company in the world that isn't trying to get more efficient, cut costs, and gain market share simultaneously. And I think the cloud plays directly into that strategy.
You mentioned security, and it's interesting. A few years ago, when you talked about security was a barrier of entry to go into the cloud. Like, oh, I'm worried about the cloud not being secure. Now it seems that the reason to move to the cloud is security because of the environments. But the other thing that's moving to the cloud is not all the things you said about cost, but could you talk a little bit about what our customers are seeing around customer experience and the business models and how they're able to take the point you just made of, like, how do I steal the customers? How does cloud help them do that?
Well, I mean, I think, again, I think back on your security point, but I was told when I came up here there were press in the room, so I can't, okay, so there's not so much I'm going to say on security. Because I think it is an important point you're on before we got off it, that I do think the security levels in, I'll just stick with our cloud, are so much higher than you could ever achieve in your own IT environment on premise. It is right up there. You have the inevitable, by the way, I was talking about the activist. I mean, you get the obviously helpful board members. We have them at Oracle who have, incredible insight into the business. And they read about, somebody getting hacked. And, the insight extends to, I don't want to be on a board, where, my company gets hacked. So I got an idea. Could you just take care of that? And that is an incredible insight. I'm telling you, it's like I find like I hadn't thought of that. So, if you give it about an hour and let them rest after that idea, you get the idea that, maybe we should grow the revenue. And so it's a full day. So you get, boy, I hope somebody doesn't write that. That's gonna be bad. So anyway, when you get into these environments, it's very hard to secure all of these, massive, these scaled, sort of one-off configurations, different servers, different operating systems, different data. These are, without me getting into tons of detail, it's hard to get. We have one configuration in our cloud. one piece of hardware, one OS, one version of the database. Everything's the same. So our problem, as opposed to 150 permutations of different computing, is materially easier, and then before we get into our ability to patch and secure and so forth. So I think security, to your point, is another big deal. In terms of business models and different applications, I think the nice thing about cloud is that you're going to get thousands of programmers, because you can't customize the applications the way you could on premise. You now get thousands of programmers who actually become your IT organization, right? They get the ability, now they're now feature stringing your technology. So as opposed to having an SI or your own IT organization that would write code and it would get very expensive and very laborious, now you have the core development organization sending you hundreds and hundreds, if not more than 1,000 features a year that you can now ingest and drive into innovation. I still think there will be a place for applications that companies have that they believe differentiate them beyond what anybody else is building commercially. So I don't think there'll be a day when there aren't some people trying to create a core app that is inherent to their business model that creates it. By the way, I still think you'll run that in the cloud, but I do believe there will still be applications that are non-standard commercial applications that companies will decide differentiate them, particularly in the way they interact directly with their customer. But I do think everything else out of that, I would get in the hands of somebody commercially who's now going to take that burden off of you, do all the work for you, feature string, give you more and more innovation that you could ever hope to be able to do internally.
Right. I think to your point of there'll always be some applications that customers think is intellectual property or very specific to their process is really relevant to this crowd, which is an industry group as opposed to the horizontal apps. Because we believe the horizontal apps that have been put in place over the last number of years have validated the cloud. And now it's time to move into the real enterprise, mission critical, or what we call digital core applications that are going to go forward. And not only are those applications, but concerns that we hear from our customers are really about data analytics, the buzzwords that we're hearing. Data analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, Internet of Things. What are your thoughts about how those things are going to move into the industries?
Well, I mean, that was very nice. I thought those were sort of the buzzwords that come out of Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. And I think the Silicon Valley, where I live, is guilty of trying to come up with words like what you described that at some point will solve all your problems. I don't know what your problem is, but whatever it is, machine-to-machine learning is going to take care of that. And I think it's sort of almost nonsense. I think machine-to-machine learning in isolation, and it's a more charismatic term. I mean, machine-to-machine learning is really more pattern matching. It's just trying to find patterns and match those patterns. And I do think over time that won't be really an application. I think it'll be a feature of an application. And so you'll see machine-to-machine learning, pattern matching, more and more integrated into the core applications as opposed to, in itself, a solution looking for a problem. And so integrating, and you already see this beginning in the analytics world, that analytics are now getting further and further integrated into the technology. I mean, I think long run, how you see these architectures moving is to try to get foundational data, normalized data at a certain level, get your applications built as microservices on top of that data, and then be able to get the analytics as close to the microservices as I possibly can. And I think that's the way you'll consistently see architectures move. So all of these little buzzwords that you raffled off, which are really words on the part of companies to get higher stock prices in the short term, they don't really mean anything until they're applied to a discrete problem. I mean, that's my view. And we at Oracle would like to strive to talk about the specific business outcomes against specific business problems, as opposed to, say, machine-to-machine learning, which I think it sounds cool, but it's got to solve a specific problem.
Great. Some of you may want to think, we're going to have a few questions in a few moments, so you might want to think a couple of your questions to ask Mark. You know, the industry's evolved over years and years, over 40 years.
The technology industry? You're talking
Technology
about?
industry, and it always starts off as kind of like best of breed products and certain categories. What's your view on the benefits of integration in suites?
Well, just what I just said, right? So, I mean, I think that, you've got all these disparate data models that exist in most companies. And so, particularly as I heard you say, a lot of people were line of business here as opposed to IT. I mean, one of the real problems in most companies is getting information. There's a lot of data, hard to turn that data into information. And most of it is because the data itself is laid out in an inconsistent way, if it's even laid out. And so it's hard to, if you will, get the data to work together. And that's why I think there'll be a lot of work over time to start to get that common view of data. It is a really hard problem, particularly as you create more and more disparate applications and more disparate data models. And so then trying to get those disparate data models built in different languages, and you go through all the complexities of it, to then communicate inter-application becomes very tough. So I think you'll see, again, suites win, but it won't be good enough for the suite to just be a collection of disparate applications from the same company. They've got to be applications that are normalized to the level where you can actually move the data and share the data and leverage the data across multiple applications. And so I do think always suites tend to win. Best of breeds tend to lose, get rolled up over time because it's very hard. I don't think that you'll see companies with hundreds and hundreds of best-of-breed applications. I don't think we'll return to the complexity we've created. I think that we'll try to eliminate that. The world will try to get simpler. And our job, and I can tell you it's hard, is to try to make all of our applications. I mean, it used to be at Oracle that if you looked at the middleware base of the middleware underpinning our applications, the middleware underneath a PeopleSoft application was different than the middleware underneath any business suite application, or different than the middleware underneath the. I mean, and we yet sold to customers a different set of middleware than we used on those applications. So by definition, we made this a really hard problem. The next the generation of applications today now all has the common foundation, and yet, as you know, Bob, even all of our industry apps don't have that same common foundation. So we still have a lot of work to do. And I think we're way out ahead of everybody, but we're still not to where we'd like to be. And so I think if you look out 5 to 10 years, it really is that. It's as common a framework, as leverageable a set of applications and services as you can possibly get to, for the reason of being able to leverage the data into real usable information.
Great. So Oracle has, I think, 9,000 products, multiple product lines, but we have a unique organizational structure for industries to address the needs of our customers. Could you talk about that and why you?
Well, you could talk about it.
Well, I know I can, but.
Well, I mean, we do it. I mean, listen, the reason that we do it the way we do it is because what we do in our industry groups is very important. We're trying to solve specific business problems for our customers. But to be very blunt with you, Anna, if you looked at them individually, they're small businesses. And if we broke them up and sent them into the core Oracle, I think we'd lose them. I think you wouldn't be able to find them. And so our strategy has been, right or wrong, to create almost an incubation model where we built a two-dimensional model. So the way Oracle's lined up, by the way, which creates a bit of complexity, is we have we have all those products going into big region organizations. So people that build it, people that sell it. And that's sort of big development organization, 45,000 people, 35,000 people in our sales organization. And if we broke our GBUs into that big machine, it becomes a small piece of a big machine. So our strategy has been to keep those businesses whole, to let them have their own strategy, to have their own R&D, to realize that strategy, their own go-to-market, to realize that R&D into the marketplace directly with customers. So the benefit is you get a full end-to-end organization model that's completely riveted around that strategy and solving the problem of that customer on that business problem. We think it's very valuable. Now, the complexity of that for us is that Bob and our regions and our development teams don't meet in the company until May. So there is the chance that you wouldn't find collaboration amongst our teams in the field. It is possible. It's not what we desire. It's not what we prefer. But it is possible, and that is the challenge we have at a leadership level. But we believe it's worth it to be able to execute. No other company's really executed on the strategy that we've described. And the reason is because of what I just said. It's a complex leadership model to go execute. That said, as you know, our industry groups in revenue over the past 6 or 7 years have almost quadrupled in revenue. So if you look, if they had $1, they sort of moved to like $4 of revenue. That sort of scale. 60-70% of that is really organic. 30-40% of that is acquired. And so it's become a bigger part of Oracle as a percent of Oracle. It's grown in headcount as a percent of Oracle, all because we've been able to execute this strategy. I also believe if we do this right, it actually helps all of Oracle, because the business problems we try to solve are some of the most important business problems our customers have. You know, whether it's merchandising or planning and retail, or whether it's core banking. I mean, I can continue to go on down the list. I mean, these are very hard problems, important problems, and I think it creates a very positive overall position for Oracle. So, given the importance of the problem, given the significance of it, that's why we do it the way we do.
Right. Thank you. So can we open this up for questions now? Lights go up a little bit. Thank you.
A big audience to try to do Q&A with, though. Well, we could try.
Do we have any questions? Let's see. Over here? No?
This may be somebody asking about their raise, too, like you.
I wish they'd ask you about my raise.
Yeah, we'll keep that short, though.
Any questions? Here we go. We have one here. Here we come. Microphone is on the way.
Sorry about that. Hi, David Lesser from Raymond James. You brought up some questions and difficulties that I think anybody who outsources IT would have. I'm just wondering, when you talk about having your own cloud, your own data center, being able to get synergy and efficiencies, how do you deal with now other people's data? You know, PII, confidentiality. We in a highly regulated industry have to keep watching that there's no data loss. So how does Oracle solve that problem for themselves?
Well, solve it for ourselves or for our customers? I think you probably mean both, I guess. But I mean, in the end, there are a certain level of certification, sounds like you mentioned one of them, that we have to adhere to, and some of them change by industry. So you'll find some in financial services, they're different from what you may see in healthcare. There are general regulatory issues that affect all companies in terms of security issues, et cetera. And the bad news for us is we have to deal with all of them. So we have to go get certified, and sometimes they morph by country. So it isn't just good enough to do them in the United States. You have to do them in many countries. And unfortunately for us, again, we not only have to have data centers in all those countries where, for example, data sovereignty is perhaps a law, or employee confidentiality with no employee data going outside a border. We have to deal and sort through all of that. So that's on us, and that's something we've got to get done. In addition to further deal with it, we will in our cloud almost always encrypt whatever data we've got. Now that does a couple things. One, historically you never encrypted data because it slowed the performance of the computers to a crawl. Now that problem has been solved technically, and so we encrypt virtually all of our data, not just at rest, but we encrypt that data all the way across the line. So, you have totally encrypted data, which, by the way, is a great security feature for us, in addition to being what also gives you the benefit of some of the privacy on some of the regs that we have to deal with as well.
We can take another one. Is there another one here? Yeah, is there one over here?
Yes, very good. David from Aspider. This machine-to-machine learning and some of the comments that you made, quite interested to know how you see the future of Java, because there's billions of devices out there with that environment in it, and the more we can push the smarts out to those devices, potentially, the more intelligent the overall system can be. So how do you see that evolving? I was a little bit concerned that you thought of it as that Bob was just using some kind of cliches there, but it seems much more substantial than that.
Well, the applications are substantial. It's a little bit like the term cloud, and some of these terms that get used. That it's the phraseology that I sometimes deal with, because they're so general, they're so generic, and it's almost flippant in many cases. Part of the technology community that yeah, thanks for your problem. Big data, or machine-to-machine / cloud, or all the above will solve whatever your problem is. Next question. And so that's more the reason I have what I do. Now, I think to your question about Java, Java probably has 11, 12 million active programmers today on the development language. Java, I think the whole area of dev test, if we were to look at the IT industry, companies spend about $1 trillion on IT. About a third of that is just simply on developing applications, of which Java is the most sophisticated programming and popular programming language of that sort of ecosystem of development. I think what you'll see happen, but what will happen will be dev test will become almost all cloud-based. Java, as you used to know it, is a licensed technology, will now become available via the cloud. So it'll become available by the drink as opposed to by the license. It'll become ubiquitous in terms of your ability to get access to core modern Java. And I think your point is correct. I think the opportunity to now get a Java-based thing, for lack of a better term, and the ability now to centralize analytics around that Java program thing becomes infinitely superior solution to many others out there. So Java is, I think you're going to see more Java, not less. And I think the cloud, actually that process is an enabler to more Java than probably anything we've seen in a long time. You now you can go right to the Oracle Cloud right now and get the latest commercial version of secured Java. As we speak. So we're heavily investing in Java. I think Java's got probably its best days ahead. And to your point, the Internet of Things, as it's so called, plays well into the fact of software that can now go into what would be an object or a thing, and now give us back analytics that we frankly could never have had before.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, thank you.